Alright, explain this to me one more time.
What we need in order to take over the galaxy is one type of Metroid.
Okay, got it.
Not alphas, gammas, zetas, omegas, whatever that thing is, and certainly not this.
But what's wrong with that one?
That's not a Metroid, that is Samus.
Wait, Samus is a Metroid now? So that's why the games are called Metroid.
I don't get paid enough for this.
Metroid Dread is such a fantastic game, with its rewarding gameplay loop, awesome boss fights, fun mobility options, and exciting sequence break opportunities, which make it feel refreshingly new, yet still familiar to the series as a whole. As I mentioned some time ago in my review, if you may, I think that Dread manages to perfectly capture some of the magic that made each previous release such iconic titles in its own right, while still creating its own identity that can stand on its own merits. And I'm happy to say that most of my feelings from that video are the same today. However, one of the main things I mentioned then is that I felt that the endgame felt a bit rushed, for the lack of a better term, from the sudden change of pacing during the final act when compared to what came beforehand. It's a sentiment I've seen others share online, and it truly makes me wonder if something perhaps happened behind the scenes, or if this was something that the team had planned for all along. Either way, this inconvenience, if you may, didn't hinder my overall experience of the game. I still felt that the ending was satisfying in its own right. But I can't deny that I also wanted to see just a little bit more, which has led me to imagine a scenario for the endgame that could perhaps help alleviate this feeling. The main intent of this video is not to bash or undermine what's already present in the game, and even less the countless hours and energy the talented team at Mercurysteam placed into creating it. This is more of a what-if story, for lack of a better term, to create a scenario that might fit with the rest of the game to offer a bit more closure, and help alleviate that impression some fans might have towards the finale as a whole. Just keep in mind that I doubt this would be something Nintendo would consider making as some sort of paid DLC. It's probably in their best interest to start producing a new game altogether. And with all that out of the way, let's get started. These changes would begin after your first arrival in Hanubia. So essentially, the rest of the game is the same as the final release, up until the point after you defeat Golsuna and acquire the crossbones. This wouldn't affect any of the intended sequence breaks. Since you would already have the wave beam on hand, it would simply save you from having to backtrack to Ferenia. So keep that in mind throughout the rest of the video. Hanubia as a whole will get an overhaul in terms of the map, receiving the same type of size and navigation you're familiar with in the other locations of ZDR. This way, we can explore more of the facility and get a true sense of its purpose on the planet, as not only an outpost for the mocking ships, but also a main line of defense to the rest of their facilities. We can also add more glimpses to the deserted surface via windows, to give players a taste of what it's like on the exterior and serve as a visual indicator of how close they are to escaping the planet. The other environmental detail could be a few holograms or stations showing the status of their ships and other machinery, and perhaps an overview of their other areas on ZDR. This would lead players to notice one location they haven't visited, which coincides with a structure they can see over in the horizon, an ominous building surrounded by a perpetual thunderstorm, which, as you may assume, is a new area you will explore later on. When you arrive at a navigation room in Hanubia, Adam informs you that the exits leading to your ship are locked down, most likely as a precaution by Beak to prevent your escape or that of the X-Parasites. Thus, Samus is tasked with overriding these locks to open a path to her final escape, while Adam performs a scan to locate the Mocking's whereabouts to be safe of any traps. As you navigate through the area, you will also see more blocks and obstacles that require the use of the wave beam. So after overriding the first security lock, players will need to return to Ferenia and defeat the purple Emmi before continuing with their current task. Naturally, to reach the security locks, Samus would have to traverse through the Emmi zone, where the red unit behaves a little bit differently from its companions. The red Emmi is more docile than the rest, but the zone itself is shaped like a labyrinth of sorts, making you do all sorts of twists and turns on platforms to find your way forward. However, the main catch is that the red Emmi has better hearing, so it can detect you from afar, and a few stationary cameras can alert it of your exact location. This way, we can give the Phantom Cloak some more purpose without fully slowing down the pacing of the action, while creating a new scenario to interact with the Emmi to help it give it a bit of its own identity. The main thing that I keep from the final game is the scene where Samus destroys this unit to foreshadow the awakening of her Metroid abilities. This cutscene could take place just as Samus is about to reach the central unit, only to find it barricaded with no way of getting inside, thus allowing the Emmi to capture you and play out the cinematic that we all know so well. Once you overwrite all the security locks and awaken your Metroid powers, Adam informs Samus that he detected a warship stationed above Hanubia, which is likely where Ravenbeak is taking refuge from the X-Parasites. He then suggests that perhaps now that Samus is stronger than when she first arrived on ZDR and knows what to expect from a fight, that she should consider stopping him while she still has a chance, even though she can freely escape the planet. This is of course all tactic by the mocking to lure Samus into a false sense of hope, that he can then later exploit once he manages to overwhelm her once again. So at this point, the player can do one of two things. They can either go fight Ravenbeak as intended, or they can simply escape to their ship. Of course, if they do decide to escape, they can be treated to a bad ending, where Samus's gunship gets overpowered by Itorash, leaving her truly stranded on the planet and at the Mocking's mercy, which in turn can also help provide another story reason to why Samus decides to confront the Chozo. Though before arriving on the flagship, we would still have the encounter against the Golden Chozo Elite sporting a different moveset, some of which involve it using different power-ups against you to make the encounter more unique and establish its higher ranking through gameplay as well. The main thing that changes is that this would be the first time Samus uses her Metroid powers on an X-Parasite, to get the players excited for what could happen in the final boss fight that's yet to come. To be quite honest, I wouldn't change much of what goes on Itorash, aside from perhaps adding a few more hints as to what Ravenbeak intended to do next since ZDR got overtaken by the X-Parasites. Something minor that can be deciphered either with some background details or extra lines of dialogue. As for the rest, I will leave it as is. The fight against Ravenbeak is probably one of my favorite boss encounters in the series, and the way Samus fully awakens her Metroid DNA in a fit of rage is probably one of the coolest surprises we have ever seen, so there's no need to add or change anything for the sequence of events. Instead, the big additions to the game begin only after this climactic battle and the warship's unexpected crash on the surface. When Samus awakens, she finds herself with a new armor and Ravenbeak nowhere in sight. Her previous route back to the ship is blocked off by rubble. Itorash's crash has severely damaged the facility on the surface, thus forcing the player to find another way to return to their ship. This eventually leads into a navigation room that Samus almost destroys by accidentally siphoning its energy due to her uncontrollable Metroid powers. The facility is still operational, even though it's visibly damaged, and this time you manage to communicate with the real Adam who has been monitoring your progress. Although the Chozo had cut him off from contacting Samus earlier, Adam was able to stay up to date with her journey from the shadows thanks in part to her suit, and was devising a plan for whenever he got the chance to establish communication. He quickly informs you that while you might have defeated Ravenbeak and could escape, the X-Parasites can't be left alone on ZDR. Their existence poses a threat to the galaxy. Thus, he recalls back to what Quiet Robe and the Thoha originally intended to do with SR-3D8, destroy the planet to avoid anyone else coming into contact with the parasites. Something that may sadden Samus a bit, since ZDR is a Chozo homeworld, but believes it's probably what they would have done either way. Adam then suggests to cause a chain reaction through Cataris and Arteria by overloading their energy production, which can lead to the planet's annihilation. And so, as the player sets to return to the caverns, they will notice a subtle change in the lighting and scenery, leading to a transport that will take them to a new area in the map. A dark place that none have set foot in some time that contains a sinister secret. As you descend into the new area, you arrive at a facility that has long been abandoned, where the unstable energy makes some rooms inaccessible and creates some creepy lighting to make you feel uneasy. To make progress in this place, players will need to destroy some scenery to forge a new path, to implement some of the Metroid armor's brutality into the exploration. However, some doors will have special barriers protecting them, and so you must find their generators to siphon its energy, something you can easily do thanks in part to the new Metroid suit. Before I continue, let me quickly address what changes with a Metroid suit. As is the case with the actual game, the suit removes some of your abilities to limit your exploration options, but you don't have access to the Hyper Beam just yet. Instead, the suit will also boost your beam's strength, represented with a new visual effect. The main highlight here is that you can now instantly kill anything you parry, since Samus will use her new abilities to drain their energy on the spot. As I mentioned, this power also works on certain shields that have made it impossible for the X to invade the facility beforehand. So most of the creatures you fight here only fall prey to the parasites after you disable the security system of some rooms. Although I wouldn't have them show up immediately after, but perhaps set a flag that spawns the X after you make a certain amount of progress. A few rooms later, you will uncover even larger creatures, some resembling Experiment C-57 in some shape or form, giving you the main clue to decipher the true purpose of this facility as the laboratory where the Chozo conducted their most advanced bioweapon experimentation. This restricted facility was retooled so that Quiet Robe could attempt to recreate the Metroids or their abilities. Perhaps something Ravenbeak forced him to create after returning empty-handed from his later visit to SR-388, as an alternative to create this new army before eventually learning about Samus's infusion. The name I had planned for this area is Jutanka. It's essentially Utanka, the Chozo word for chaos, but with a J slapped in front to keep in line with the naming convention of other areas, and a fitting word to encapsulate the events that transpired in the past. I just hope that my friends at the Chozo Cypher Club don't mind me butchering the word with my artistic liberties. Eventually, you would arrive at a navigation room to get back in touch with Adam for the last time. He has been scanning the area and found that a facility is directly connected to Cataris to harvest the energy necessary to power the experiments. Due to the nature of what the Chozo were trying to create, it seems like they removed any inhibitors that control how much energy the facility can demand. So by finding the main control station, Samus could create the chain reaction needed to destroy the planet. As you continue your search, you notice a shadowy figure rummaging in the background more often, destroying any atrocities in the lab and leading the players towards a large gate filled with heavy security. Inside, the enigmatic figure is rapidly working on a monitor, bringing light back to the large room and revealing to us his identity as Quiet Robe X. Samus is shocked as the Chozo stares at her with its zombie-like mannerisms, before quickly activating the rest of the room, drawing her attention to another person in the center as the machinery becomes active, creating a diversion for the infected Chozo to slip away. The chamber is a combat test area, and as it powers up, it reveals a mutated Chozo warrior that awakens from stasis and stands in front of Samus, with its armor and body heavily disfigured. Without hesitation, Samus lunges at it, trying to get a grip on its body. The Chozo quickly evades, and the bounty hunter instead grabs part of the facility, which she drains of its power. The Chozo now understands the dangers that comes with Samus's grip, so it knows to avoid it as the boss fight begins. This battle is unique in the sense that it's Samus trying to weaken her opponent enough to secure a grab to defeat it. But this is precisely what the Chozo is also trying to accomplish, so failing to parry any attacks would result in the boss grabbing Samus, and in turn also siphoning some of her energy in the process. This experiment is no ordinary bioweapon, but the result of implementing some of the energy-stealing powers of the Metroids onto a Chozo, that I have named the Chozotroid, since I am terrible with coming up with names. These abilities are close to those C57 used to regain its health, and like it, the Chozotroid doesn't have any Metroid DNA, and because of this, it isn't able to fully drain Samus if it lands a grab. Its abilities are more of an artificial alternative to create the army Ravenbeak desired, with the Chozotroid essentially being the main test involving actual Chozos. Perhaps it was even something the Mocking used to aid him stop the X-Parasite's infestation, and was later discarded due to some unforeseen side effects, doubly so after he learned about Samus' condition. Ravenbeak would benefit more from a legion of Metroids under his control than running the risk of trying to implement their abilities onto his troops. We would obviously convey this information to the player via the environments leading up to the boss fight and with the Chozotroid's behavior, while keeping some aspects vague enough for them to put the pieces together with their imagination. As the boss battle continues, the Chozotroid can use a couple of new techniques to keep players on their toes. But when it is ultimately defeated, Samus manages to secure a grab and siphon all of its energy, leaving only a dry husk behind, similar to the ones we saw in Samus Returns or even Prime 3. After all of this, you find the main control panel that manages the energy of Jutanka, where Samus would carefully try to interact with the computer to avoid accidentally draining its energy. She then sets the station to overload itself, but it will take some time before it's unstable enough to destroy the planet. So she sets off to return to her ship while she still has some time to spare. During her escape, Samus is ambushed by Ravenbeak, who, after surviving the crash, stayed undercover to regain some strength and stalk her from the shadows. He may not be at his full strength, but is still able to pull up a fight, and knows to keep his distance. The confrontation can be shown in either a short cinematic to avoid bloating the runtime, or a small boss fight to lure the player into a false sense of security with how the Mocking struggles to keep up with Samus. The point of this encounter is to set the bar for how the two fare against each other, before the purple X-Parasite infiltrates the room and consumes the Chozo, kickstarting the real battle against humanoid Ravenbeak X. This true final boss fight would consist of two phases. The first one consists of recycling some moves from the original fight, but now warped by the parasite's mutations or incorporating some of the other bosses it has consumed. This would continue until Samus can grip onto Ravenbeak's arm cannon, only stealing the Hyper Beam, which forces the boss to mutate into the monstrosity we know as Ravenbeak X. During the second phase, the gigantic boss will constantly approach Samus across the room, and if it manages to corner the player, it would instantly kill them. So the strategy here is to use the Hyper Beam to break off some of his body to push him away and try to force the X-Parasite to return to its original body. Annihilating the boss with a beam might be the safer solution because it could take Samus some time to fully drain the energy from such a massive body. During all of this, the energy continued to accumulate, and as the boss fight ends, it reached the critical point to produce the chain reaction. And so, as you might expect, we come to the part where we have our escape sequence. With the Hyper Beam in hand, you can use its power to create a path that leads you back to Hanubia and destroy the debris that was previously blocking your escape. This way, you can also witness the wreckage of the facility or vehicles that were stationed here after the crash of Itorash. And so, do the changes end the moment you arrive at your ship, where we play the same ending we currently have in the released game. Adam stops you from piloting the ship, Quiet Robe X appears, revealing this is where he came after we last saw him, and sacrifices himself to save Samus and allow her to escape, bringing an end to Metroid Dread. The main thing I would add to the ending is a small post-credit scene. Something that plays after you get your final time, with the only requirement being is to collect 100% of the items with no time limit, like what the Prime games did in the past. The scene would show us the inside of some unnamed ruins where we find a Chozo mural. Etched on it are the names of Old Bird, Grey Voice, Platinum Chest, and countless others. Underneath them, we see the names of Quiet Robe and Ravenbeak, all written in their language. It's a personal site where Samus has made a shrine to honor their memory and pay respects. Finally, when we think it's all over, we hear Samus's voice off screen as she speaks one sentence in Chozo before fading to black. The purpose of the scene is not to foreshadow any future games, but to add a little bit more of character and world building with a place where Samus can honor an old tradition to both friend and foe. In itself, not only one last bit of fan service to the die-hard crowd that has been keeping up with the continuity, but also a way for the developers to pay respect to the lineage of the 2D series, and a way to close the book on this particular chapter of the Metroid saga. Not the end of the franchise as a whole, but of this particular story arc. I know that all that I just went through sounds like a lot that might overbloat the game, but I suspect that when it's all played out, it might add an extra hour or two to the final gameplay runtime. Perhaps a little bit less on the hands of an experienced player, especially since Jutanka won't have any items for you to acquire, letting you solely focus on the new area's mysteries, leaving Itorash as the final cutoff point for item collecting like it is in the current game. We can also go ahead and add a special 10th archive that only unlocks once you get 100% of the item and after finishing the game, showing the origins of the Chozo droid or it combating another experiment. And of course, while we're at it with bonus rewards, we will also include a scene where Samus takes off her helmet after the credits roll, to reward the players who finish the game under a specific time and showcase a new look to Samus, since it's the first mainline game that's developed in HD. In terms of post-game bonuses, I would add a cosmetic change to Samus's armor, like it was in Metroid Prime where Samus returns, to encourage a second playthrough. This can either be the Metroid armor, which changes colors with each suit upgrade, or an armor resembling the Emmi's appearance that gains more plating as you strengthen it. Or, my personal choice, a redesign of the suits with more mocking influences, which can resemble the aesthetics of Ravenbeak's armor towards the end. While I'm on the subject of additions, and because I don't want to make this into a separate video, I think it would be cool to have a prequel story that shows us what happened on ZDR during the X-Parasite infestation. Something similar to what Xenoblade Chronicles has done with Torn of the Golden Country or Future Connected, but from Ravenbeak's perspective. This extra content would be short in length, perhaps taking around 2 or 3 hours to complete. Focus more on exploration with no extra items to collect and a limited selection of abilities. This way we can create a different gameplay feel to make the experience distinct enough from the base game. The abilities at Ravenbeak's disposal would be similar to the ones he used in his boss fight, while also limiting the amount of times he can use the Hyper Beam at its full power. Perhaps, due to a system malfunction, you can only use it a few times before needing to recharge, so this way we can keep the satisfaction of using the beam at its full capacity without sacrificing the game's overall difficulty. The story would begin when the Mockings return from SR-388 and plan how to safely capture the Metroids when they eventually return to the planet. However, Quiet Robe notices one of the soldiers behaving oddly, and informs Ravenbeak that they might have been infected by an X-Parasite, thus starting the rapid spread on ZDR. From here, the Mocking must find a way to prevent the parasites from escaping and lure them into Ellen to contain their spread. With this, we could also take the opportunity to witness Ellen during its prime and get some more backstory on the location or its possible connections to Ferenia, and base the final boss around a heavily mutated Chozo soldier that was patient zero of the infection. And so, only after containing the parasites does Ravenbeak return to SR-388, only to find the Metroids extinct at the hands of Samus. Alternatively, you could also focus the story around Ravenbeak's first encounter with the Emmys, creating a reverse cat and mouse scenario where you are the one hunting down the robots for a change, concluding on a proper boss fight against the first unit that Samus later finds damage in Arteria. While I honestly believe both concepts have a lot of potential to create a fun experience, I think the downfall of ZDR makes for a better narrative point with more opportunities to change the gameplay in general. And that about covers the gist of what I had in mind regarding the end of the game. I'm fully aware this would involve a lot of work just to implement it into the game, so I doubt Nintendo would even consider adding something of this scope unless they plan to remake Dread many years from now. Considering the massive workload to make this a reality, I think it's probably better that the team focuses its resources on making a new game anyways. This was just my idea of what could have happened, assuming the team had the time, budget, or manpower to make it a reality, and they were on board with it to begin with. It's so easy to romanticize over the what-if scenarios when it comes to adding stuff or ideas into a game, that at times we forget the arduous task that comes with game development to make them a reality. So I don't think it's fair to use the absence of ideas like these to criticize or discredit Dread as a whole, because the rest of the game offered a thoroughly complete experience that oozed with a lot of polish that can stand in its own merits. I will admit this was a bit of a challenge, not just figuring out a new scenario that can follow up on some of the story beats that were already present, but also making them add new twists to the gameplay that can shake things off and keep players on their toes to unravel what will happen next. I won't deny that I may have gone a bit too far in a few places when coming up with a scenario, and that it's by no means perfect. Between Jutanka sharing the lab setting of Dairen and the desolate creepy factor of Ellen, it can make the area feel a bit redundant at first glance, but the goal here was to try and show a different side of Chozo experimentation. Something more sinister that offers a contrast to what we've seen in the past, and could fit the tone of their most dangerous creations. I could have also gone deeper in explaining some of the finer details regarding the new environment or boss attacks, but I wanted to stay focused and touch the gist of the ideas while leaving some wiggle room in case someone out there wanted to fill the blanks themselves. If anyone is interested in expanding the ideas of this scenario, feel free to go ahead and do so and let me know what you would change or add in the comments or over in my social media.
Oh, hello.
Either way, I am more than happy with what was offered in the game at the end of the day. Metroid Dread is not only a fantastic game in its own right, but it's one you can tell came from a deep place of passion to the series and the craft as a whole. And I'm excited to see what the developers can come up with for the future of the series. Hey there, just another quick reminder that you can catch up with the streams over in the second channel, Orpheon Station. And there's also some new items available in the merch store, including this fancy poster made by my talented friend Kubaushi, who helps with creating the art assets of the channel. Lastly, I wanted to give a special thanks to my patrons for their continued support on the videos. With all that said, thank you so much for watching, and I do hope to see you in the next video or stream.